Alright guys, I'm going to go over how to make a coil and attach it to your pinch pot. This will be the base feature, so it will look something like this here. Alright, so what you'll do is you'll start with a chunk of clay, and you want to spread your fingers out. Eventually when it's longer, basically a finger space between works really well, but you'll start with just a chunk of clay. And do what you probably did when you were a kid with Play-Doh. This is like one of the only techniques of Play-Doh that actually works quite well with clay. So keep in mind that this clay that I'm using has been wedged, it's prepped. Okay, so I went ahead and made sure that it's really consistent as far as its moisture content goes. That's why it's rolling really nicely for me and it's not going to break. Okay, so if I roll quickly, this thing is going to get longer and longer and longer. So when it's long enough to stretch the surface that I want, what I'll do is I'll turn it around on itself and make kind of a donut out of it. So I'm going to check this piece here to see if it's got an appropriate length, and it does. It's actually a little bit big, so I'm going to do some trimming, and I'm going to trim this with my popsicle stick. So I'm just going to cut this off with the popsicle stick a little bit. Then realize that any two pieces of clay that come together and become connected cannot just be smeared together. They have to be scored and slipped. So what you do is you take your toothpick tool and you make scratch marks. If you don't have a toothpick, use something else like a bent paper clip, or I guess last resort would be a fork. But use these scratch marks that go in opposite directions. We often refer to that as cross hatching. Okay, you're going to dip into the slip, which is liquefied clay. So you smash clay around in the water to where it becomes the consistency of toothpaste. And you're going to smear some of that on both sides. So don't be in the assumption that just because you put it on one side, when it touches the other, it's going to have slip there. Take the time to do it on both sides. You will not regret that. Okay. Then you're going to press it together until you get this perfect circle. Okay. This little donut shape here is called a coil base for our pinch pot. I like to kind of hang it on my finger while I approach the next process. This next step is called blending. So I'm going to score the two things together that I want to blend. In this case, the two ends of this coil. Then I'm going to take the popsicle stick, and with slight pressure, I'm putting a little pressure with my index finger here, I'm going to start sculpting this to where it looks like it was never two pieces. Okay, so I want to blend it together to where that seam is no longer identifiable by a person looking at my work. Okay, so I'm looking at this, placing a little pressure, sometimes trimming it a little off. If I get a little extra on my popsicle stick, I can swipe it over there. And I'm going to trim, trim, trim till I get a nice donut shape. Using your fingers to smooth things out is definitely recommended. You have at least 8 really good tools. I think you can count your thumbs, 9 and 10, and then whatever I gave you in the bag. So this little donut is going to go on the base of your pinch pot. As advised, never take a pinch pot and set it down on its bottom and ruin the rounded well. We want to keep it like this on our table while we're working with it. If it becomes weak at any point, if it ever becomes weak, you can use what's called a temporary armature. So in this case, a piece of paper, and you can stick it inside of there just to give it a little bit of strength while you're manipulating it. You're going to put the coil base on top. Then you're going to do a little sketch with a tool. I used my toothpick. You can use whatever you want. That's going to give me a guideline of where I need to put my scoring marks. So scoring marks, again, in drawing, this is called cross-hatching. We can call it cross-hatching here, but really it's called scoring. So this is the welding process in clay: slip, score, and blend. Always slip, score, and blend both sides, even if it would work with only doing one. Some people are pretty radical and they like to skip steps. I wouldn't advise that because of all the time and effort you spent on your project. You want it to work out. So when it dries and when it's fired, it will just fall off if you haven't done the process correctly. So make sure you're doing cross-hatched, so multiple directions of scratching. I would say my scratch marks are slightly aggressive, but not really aggressive to where they would pop a hole. And then I'm going to get some slip and I'm going to smear it into those score marks. So that's scoring. This appropriate name for that scratching is called scoring. And the appropriate name for this liquefied clay is called slip. Make sure it's actually pasty and it's not just dirty water. You're going to smear that slip into those cracks, okay? So what's really happening here is the slip went in those cracks and the slip went in those cracks, and then you're going to press it together. So eventually that is going to dry and bond, and that's going to be what welds it together. From this step, you have to think about the two separate pieces. So at some point I had a pinch pot and then I had a coil, and I wanted them to stick together so that they could become one, and that could be the base for my pinch pot. I like to give it a few taps to make sure that it balances well on the table. Then I take my fingers and I make any adjustments. It was a little off center, so I wanted to do a little bit of adjusting there. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to blend it together. So when I'm blending, what I like to do is run the toothpick directly through the attached object and the base, in this case, which is a pinch pot, and scratch from one side to the other. So you're kind of like acting like a little doctor here. You're going to stitch them together with these little crosshatch marks. Then you're going to blend them together. So I'll just start with the outside. I would also want to do that on the inside just to be extra sure that the shape looks nice. And if I want to do any pressing or pushing to alter the shape of that coil, that's certainly acceptable and advised. So you want it to look nice. You need to be a critic of your work and go, is this very appreciable? Is it nice to look at? Okay, if it's not, then take the extra time to make some adjustments on it, especially in the blending process where you're trying to unify two pieces of clay. Okay, so I've got that outside pretty well blended. Dip your finger maybe in some water, take some time to apply some pressure, go around it, make sure that it's the exact shape that you want it to be, because eventually this is going to be very, very permanent. Okay, so I have this coil base here on the bottom of this pinch pot. I will take the time to go ahead score and blend the inside. Okay, I won't waste your time too much in this video. Got 7 minutes in here attaching. Now understand that, yeah, this is a 7-minute video at this point. It might end up being a 10-minute video, but there's no chance on your first time that you're gonna get this like looking exactly perfect. So don't be afraid to just squash your mug, re-wedge it, and do it all over again once your mind and your hands have coordinated a little bit and you truly do understand the concept, because once that happens, there's gonna be a world of possibilities for you as far as being a sculptor. So you wanna take extra time to make sure it looks exactly how you want it to look. So right here, I have a coil base on a pinch pot. I can give it a few taps, getting it to look exactly like I want. Now obviously I started with a smaller piece of clay, that's why this is small. You want to think about the fact that it is going to shrink after it gets fired, so it'll be, if you imagine this being inside more, like the same amount of thickness, it's going to be smaller. So if you want your cup to be bigger, that has to happen now. It's not like you can go back and make it bigger later, okay? So that's the coil making process. Hopefully this little video is helpful to you if you missed it during class. Make sure that your pinch pot always has a rounded bottom and it has a coil base on it in some shape. I've had students make this a square, heart, sometimes they make it a letter. As long as the base helps it stand, it doesn't really matter what its shape is. Just make sure you slip, score, and blend it together.